Story recapped here. Today I'm going to explain an action, crime, and sci-fi movie called 2047 Virtual Revolution. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Nash tries to complete a medieval quest along with his squad. He leads the fight but easily gets overpowered by his enemy. One of his squad mates backs him up, but he gets beaten too. Another one of Nash's squad mates appears and shoots an arrow into the enemy's chest. However, the enemy uses her powers to block the other arrows. Out of arrows, the archer takes a sword to fight, but the opponent releases a shockwave to knock her back. Dalwyn, his virtual girlfriend, throws knives at the enemy, which she easily blocks. Nash then recovers and duels with the enemy while Dalwyn heals one of their squad mates, allowing him to stab the enemy. Finally completing the quest, they obtain the amulet needed to advance to the next round. His squad wants to resume the quest immediately, but Nash tells him to go ahead because he needs to check his emails. Once alone, he reads a message from the priestess, telling him to meet her at the temple. Seeing this, Nash logs out from the virtual world. Nash Trenton awakens in his apartment in Neo Paris in 2047, the century of technological revolution. Although people expected the revolution to be about flying cars and robots, it instead became the opportunity to live in virtual worlds or verses. People can immerse themselves in the verses by using avatars to play in different settings like medieval, science fiction, western, and more. Eventually, people couldn't tell the difference between reality and fantasy. Because of this, society changed, and 75% of the human population, known as the Connected, has moved into the verses for good. However, Nash is a hybrid who chooses to live half of his time in reality and half of it in the verses. He heads to Cinternus Corporation, where he meets Dina, his employer, who gives him an important task. A group of terrorists known as the Necromancers has launched a computer virus attack that has killed 148 gamers. Nash suggests reporting to Interpol to avoid increasing the body count, but Dina doesn't trust them as they get hacked constantly. Dina argues that the amount they pay him speaks volumes about how much the corporation trusts him, so she assigns Nash to locate the Necromancers and eliminate them. Nash immediately heads to the address that Dina gave him. There, he breaks into a building but finds no one inside. As he's about to leave, a man suddenly grabs him and tosses him to the ground. He gets kicked relentlessly, but Nash dodges and knocks him back. They struggle on the floor until Nash lands his elbow against the man's chin. Getting back up, the two exchange blows until the man throws Nash down. He then takes his gun and ID before leaving. After this, Nash goes to one of the few bustling slums of the city to find his friend, Morel. While tending to his wound, Morel asks what happened, and Nash just excuses that he had a bad encounter. Morel scoffs at this, as there are not enough people awake in the real world for bad encounters. He knows that Nash has another purpose for coming to see him, so Nash asks him to hack the Interpol servers to check security footage for the man who attacked him. Morel complains that it's risky, so he asks for hardware from one of Nash's clients as payment. He wonders how people can still afford Nash's services as a shadow agent, but Nash only cares that he gets paid. Morel then comments that he can't really picture Nash being connected, at least after what happened to Helena, Morel's late sister and Nash's ex-girlfriend. Hearing her name triggers Nash, so he storms out. While in the verses, Nash takes comfort in Dalwyn's presence as he mulls over Morel not being over Helena's death. He can't blame him though, as Morel believes something was wrong with her death. Having completed his task, Morel goes to Nash's house the next day. He didn't find the man who attacked him, but he did find someone who kept returning to the building. He places the information in a flash drive, which Nash later takes to Dina. As Dina's employees run the person's face through their database to identify him, she shares that they've been covering up the attacks to avoid involvement from Interpol. After identifying the man as Leonard Lorenz, Nash breaks into his flat but finds him immersed in the verses. He takes a chair to block the front door, but the man who beat him up suddenly walks in. Nash throws a chair against him and pulls out his gun, but the man knocks it off his hand and chokes him against the wall. Grabbing a bottle, he smashes it on the man's head and kicks him off. While the man gets dizzy, Nash continues hitting him and slamming his head against the fireplace. However, the man recovers and elbows him. He kicks him in the stomach before throwing him down. Finally, Nash recovers his gun and shoots his enemy in the head. Struggling through his injury, Nash takes another chair to block the door before shooting Leonard while he's still in the game. Afterward, he finds his stolen gun and ID and logs into Leonard's account to go undercover. Nash wakes up in the verses as a woman in a warfare setting. After gearing up, he steps out and meets John, Leonard's teammate. He tells him that Camille is organizing a meeting, so they need to go to the surface. On their way, they find another team battling a large machine called the Cerberus. While they're distracted, the two slip into another path. only to encounter more enemies. Covering each other, the two make their way across while picking off the enemies. After defeating the other team, however, a cyborg blocks their path and starts shooting. Hiding behind pillars, they shoot back at the cyborg, but their bullets seem to have no effect. Nash wonders why they're even bothering, so John reminds him that the deeper into the PvP zone, the more difficult it is for players to survive. If they pass through, they're less likely to run into an agent. John uses a flash grenade to blind the enemy, allowing Nash to come up behind him and shoot him in the head. With that, they reach a warehouse where they meet with Camille, the leader of the Necromancers. Upon their arrival, Camille tells someone to bring in the beacon. John then reports that Interpol was snooping around the area of their last attack, so their mission is gaining attention. Camille decides that they need to change strategies, as their plot to scare gamers off the game isn't working. They can't force people to leave the Versus if they can't control the media, which keeps the deaths under secrecy. Nash asks what's the new angle, and Camille considers something less violent but more radical. A player then brings in the beacon and sets it up. As soon as it's done, the men apprehend Nash and take his weapons. Camille figures out that Nash isn't Leonard as he didn't make the rallying sign when he came in, so they assume that Leonard is dead. Camille notes that people believe nothing wrong will happen to them as long as they're online, but that's wrong. To get him to talk, Camille intends to torture him offline, knowing that Nash would have needed to use Leonard's device in his house to log into his account. Nash tries to log out, but the beacon prevents him and every player around it from disconnecting. While his men are off to kill Nash in Leonard's flat, Camille points out how producers govern the rest, but consumers tend to question the ways of these political elites. This is why the government collaborated with corporations in creating the Versus so that consumers can be kept docile in the virtual games. This is also why Interpol has also been on the case, hoping to maintain the status quo. Camille believes that it's wrong for Nash to help the producers uphold their control over the consumers. Just then, Nash headbutts his captors and unpins a grenade. The explosion kills the Avatar, allowing him to wake up back in Leonard's flat and shoot Camille's men. After this, he goes to Morel and asks him to do a map analysis of the warfare setting he was in. However, Interpol suddenly lands on the rooftop, and the two assume they're here for them. Nash hides while Morel addresses the Interpol agents. Special Agent Stilson interrogates Morel about why he hacked their servers recently. Nervously, Morel claims he was just curious, but Stilson accuses him of either working for terrorists or corporations looking for them. With no other choice, Morel claims that he came across an internal memo about the virus attacks, so he hoped to make money if he discovered valuable information about it. He explains that companies hired him to find failures in their security systems, hence how he found the internal memo. However, he didn't find anything useful. Stilson buys this and leaves with his men. When the coast is clear, Nash thanks Morel for his loyalty. Later, he returns to his apartment, assuming that Camille hasn't discovered his identity yet. He logs into his medieval game and unwinds by completing a quest. After defeating an opponent team, Dalwin notices that Nash is troubled. He assures her that he's fine before leaning in for a kiss. Their moment is interrupted when he receives an email from Cinternus, so he goes there immediately. Dina is unhappy that Interpol found out about the attacks in their games. Nash already knows this but claims his trail has been cold since he last eliminated the Necromancers he encountered. Even the map analysis revealed nothing, as if the Necromancers covered their tracks and logged in and out elsewhere to avoid leaving a trail. Dina urges him to find something since she doesn't want Interpol interfering. Although she believes Interpol and Cinternus are allies, they're not friends. They pay taxes to keep the government running. Then the government pays the people's universal income to allow the consumers to keep playing their games. Before nearly everyone became connected, the government also had to pay for healthcare, retirement funds, insurance, and more. Since most of the connected barely reach the age of 40 due to their sedentary lifestyles, the government only has to pay the bare minimum for food, rent, and connection to the Versus. The politicians don't do anything since they're benefiting from it. Her words make Nash consider Camille's beliefs, but he continues his mission anyway. Later, he goes to Morel's place to ask him to hack into Interpol's servers. Although Morel was traumatized by his last interaction with Interpol, he agrees anyway. Nash goes to his apartment but gets ambushed by Camille, who happens to be a woman offline. She tells him that it's ironic that he works for Cinternus, given their hand in Helena's death. Nash believes that the Necromancer's virus killed Helena, but Camille reveals that Cinternus made the virus. When Cinternus saw the Necromancer's movement as a threat, they created the virus that could kill them online. The Necromancers stole the virus and improved it to kill the threats. However, Camille assures him that they've seen the errors of their ways, so they plan to stop the killings. But they still intend to free the connected. Camille claims that Helena was a necromancer like her, hence why Cinternus targeted her. Everything starts making sense to Nash, so he reveals that Interpol is close to discovering the necromancer's base, given the intel Morel has found. He adds that Fahim, one of the necromancers, is under tight surveillance. Camille insists on freeing the connected, but Nash questions whether people want to be freed. Still, Nash decides to help the necromancers. That evening, the Interpol tails Fahim, but he disappears from their sight when he gets under a bridge. Unbeknownst to them, he goes into a manhole where Nash leads him to the cathedral where the others are waiting. After this, Nash goes to Morel to see what other information Interpol has on the necromancers. While waiting, he drinks liquor and accidentally reveals that he's been helping the necromancers. Because of this, Morel reminds him that correcting the system won't bring back Helena. This hurts Nash, so he shifts the conversation back to the information he gathered. Morel reveals that Interpol has an informant who works with the necromancers. They're supposed to meet up that night, so Nash goes to check it out. He heads to an abandoned mansion but gets ambushed by Stilson and his men. It turns out that Nash was seen in a satellite image when Fahim disappeared, thus making him a suspect. Knowing he has connections with Morel, Stilson faked the note about the meetup to lead him there. Stilson threatens to arrest Nash for intervening with the investigation, but instead, he wants to negotiate. He wants him to continue working with Cinternus, but he must report to Interpol whatever he finds before taking it to Cinternus. Nash must also ask them for authorization before performing any drastic tasks. As Nash considers this, someone suddenly shoots Stilson and his men. Camille and the necromancers reveal themselves, having followed Nash and attacked when they saw him captured. They head to Nash's apartment to discuss the plan in private. The necromancers plan to launch a virus that Fahim created to shut down all consoles until the Versus collapse. With this, everyone will be forced to return offline and resume their lives in the actual world. Nash questions if it's right to free the Connected against their will, but Camille claims that everyone wants to be free. However, they need to launch the virus from the main Versus so that it can spread and replicate. With this, Camille asks Nash to launch it from within Cinternus headquarters. All he has to do is take their device and plug it into one of Cinternus computers. Then, their hackers will do the rest. By tomorrow, she promises that the world will be different as all the Versus will cease to exist. Hearing this, Nash thinks of Dalwyn. Camille and her men leave, and Nash contemplates what he'll do. He understands that humans aren't meant to spend their lives purely online, but he also knows that the Connected chose that life for themselves. Thinking that it might be his last chance, he logs into the Verse and meets with Dalwyn. He asks her what their relationship means, but she refuses to put labels on it as that's what the real world does. Instead, she cherishes how well they feel when they're together, and that's all that matters. Nash soon logs out and looks out into their empty society. He then turns to Helena's picture and makes his decision. Nash heads to Cinternus, and during his meeting with Dina, he plugs in the device, allowing the necromancers to proceed with their plan. Afterward, Nash returns to his apartment with a heavy heart and logs into the Versus. There, he does another mission with his squad as if nothing is happening. However, they receive the alert that some Versus are getting wiped out. Immediately, his squad gets angry and wants to stop the necromancers. However, Dalwyn discovers that another guild has located the necromancers and posted their address for every player to see. With that, players from Neo Paris gather to intervene, making Nash realize that in the end, the Connected refuse to leave their Versus, even with the hope of freedom at their hands. Soon, a horde of angry Connecteds bang the doors to the necromancer's base, much to the team's confusion. Filled with anger from being forced out of their perfect virtual lives, they eventually break down the doors. Camille and her men try to shoot them down, but they're outnumbered. It doesn't take long for the necromancers to get brutally murdered, including Camille, who gets clubbed and trampled to death by the people she was trying to save. As this happens, Nash realizes that Camille was wrong to force the Connected into freedom. The next day, he meets with Dina, who announces that the necromancers have been eliminated for good. She knows that the virus was launched inside their headquarters, making Nash a suspect. Although she can easily have him investigated, Dina chooses to let him off the hook, but he is banned from being hired into Cinternus again. Nash accepts this, so Dina asks what convinced him to turn against her. Nash reveals that he knows that Cinternus created the virus that killed Helena. However, Dina reveals that Helena was an undercover shadow agent for Cinternus, and when the necromancers found out, they killed her. Confused about which truth to believe, Nash decides to leave the pain of his past. With nothing keeping him in the real world anymore, he stops being a hybrid and fully immerses himself in the Versus. Studies have shown that the brain secretes the same hormones when experiencing something physically and virtually. Therefore, if his mind tells him that his life in the Versus is real, Nash decides that no one else can tell him otherwise.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.